Hey everyone, welcome to another video on the channel. So without any more delay, let's jump straight into today's video. Don't forget to leave a like and comment which manhwa you want to see in the next video. Let's go. One day, a single treasure map appeared in the world. It promised to reveal the martial arts of Cheongija, the greatest master in history, hidden in the Hengshan Mountains. Amidst the rain falling on the forest, a crow rested silently on a branch, watching the surroundings. Suddenly the bird cawed loudly and took flight, startled by a sudden disturbance in the air. Invisible cuts tore through the sky with impressive speed, stirring the wind around the mountain peak. The force of the blows was so intense that it seemed to distort space, descending relentlessly on the rock. A beam of cutting energy shot through the mountain from top to bottom, splitting the colossal structure perfectly in half. The massive rock could not withstand the impact and began to slide, separating from the base with a heavy movement. The mountain peak tumbled, clearing the way and revealing the dark interior that had been hidden until then. Amidst the cloud of dust and the rubble of destruction, a silhouette began to emerge from the cave. The figure advanced through the dense smoke, walking calmly out of the darkness. The blade of his sword, now exposed to daylight, revealed the origin of that destructive power. The young martial artist finally emerged from his isolation, stepping into the outside world after a long time. His face displayed a serious and undisturbed expression, indifferent to the chaos he had just caused in the landscape. He paused for a moment, contemplating the vastness of the sky and the newly acquired freedom. The young man then looked at his own hand, reflecting with frustration that no matter how hard he tried, the result was still not what he expected. The young swordsman's gaze narrowed, focused on a distant memory that fueled his will. He recalled the reason for his existence. All that mattered was to get revenge, no matter the cost or the means necessary to achieve it. The image of that ancient master arose in his mind, a man whose presence radiated an overwhelming and dangerous authority. The protagonist remembered standing before a crowd of disciples, listening to the grandiose proclamations of that leader inside the cave. While other boys around him were sweating and trembling with nervousness, the young man maintained a stoic and impenetrable expression. Nothing escaped that penetrating gaze, which seemed to assess the soul of each child present in the room. All the disciples remained motionless, captivated by the master's words, not daring to divert their attention for even a second. The tension in the air was suffocating for most, but the protagonist remained calm, clearly differentiating himself from the fear that consumed his colleagues. The old master walked among the torches, preparing to dictate the rules that would govern the destiny of everyone there. A sinister smile curved the instructor's lips, revealing the pleasure he felt in imposing his absolute will on the young recruits. From that moment on, freedom was over. Their life became a regimented hell, where eating, sleeping, and training were strictly controlled. They were introduced to the secrets of the tri-energy art, and the young man absorbed every detail of that forbidden knowledge. Under the tutelage of Cheongija, he learned to wield the sword and move his body with supernatural steps, mastering each imposed technique. The ultimate goal of that suffering was revealed to all: to ascend to the realm of a martial god through sacrifice and discipline. And the swordsman fulfilled that destiny. He had completed the training and mastered those martial arts with absolute perfection. Cheongija indicated the path to follow, ordering his disciples to enter the stone structure without question. The dark entrance waited silently, like a mouth ready to swallow those who dared to cross it. Obedient, the young men marched in line into the cave, blindly trusting their master's orders. The protagonist felt the atmosphere change as soon as he crossed the threshold, remaining alert to the unknown. His eyes, however, betrayed the tension of the moment, focused and scrutinizing the darkness for any threat. Outside, Cheongija displayed a sadistic smile as the door mechanism was activated, sealing the entrance. The passage closed with a bang, isolating the children. That whole nightmare had been meticulously planned by the master. Total darkness took over the environment, and the disciples soon realized that something sinister was moving in the shadows. Panic set in when skeletal and grotesque creatures emerged from the darkness, taking the group by surprise. The instinct for survival spoke louder, and the young swordsman launched into combat to repel the sudden attack. That place became a living hell. The protagonist realized with horror that the fight for survival would be a constant and brutal routine. Abominable monsters appeared from all sides, turning every moment into a desperate battle against death. The group of disciples found themselves surrounded by gigantic beasts, forced to fight with everything they had just to see the next day. Faced with those colossal threats, the young warriors stood their ground, knowing that any hesitation would result in their end. The protagonist gripped the hilt of his sword tightly, turning his fear into determination to survive the carnage. The combat reached its violent peak. The martial artist delivered a decisive blow, seeking to end the confrontation with lethal precision. He executed the 3-energy sword art with fluidity. Every movement and step of the technique he had mastered now manifested with deadly perfection. Silence finally fell over the cave. Surrounded by the remains of monsters and shattered bodies, the survivor stood in the bloody darkness. His gaze fell upon his fallen comrade, remembering the name Yongwoo. Victory in the test came at a high cost, claiming precious lives. Upon emerging into the daylight, the young man accepted his reality. He confirmed to himself that this was the name by which the world knew him. His journey led him back to civilization. The imposing architecture and bustling streets contrasted sharply with the hell he had left behind. He entered a busy local establishment. The sound of the door opening was barely noticed amidst the noise of the chatting customers. An attendant promptly approached to greet him. The swordsman walked through the hall, ignoring the festive atmosphere around him. However, his hand remained close to his sword. Even in a safe environment, the instinct to keep his weapon within reach never faded. His presence, however, did not go unnoticed. Other customers watched the newcomer with curiosity, noting that he was not an ordinary traveler. One young woman in particular fixed her gaze on him. Her expression changed as she noticed the arrival of the strange warrior. She continued to observe him discreetly as he settled in. There was a genuine interest in her gaze as she studied his behavior. The boy tasted the food and was surprised by the flavor. However, the brief moment of satisfaction was interrupted by a sudden realization. The waiter, with a nervous smile, requested payment. He reminded the customer that the meal consumed had a price that needed to be settled. Before the problem escalated, the young woman intervened. With a gentle gesture, she extended a bag of coins, offering to cover the stranger's debt. The waiter was disconcerted by the sudden attitude. Holding the payment, he stammered, surprised by the young lady's generosity towards a stranger. The protagonist turned his attention to his benefactor. He stared at her with a stoic expression, trying to discern the intentions behind that unexpected gesture. His gaze was piercing and sharp. Isolation had made him cautious, and the young man analyzed her presence with a calculating coldness. The atmosphere around the establishment seemed to carry a different weight. This was no ordinary place, and the air vibrated with a silent tension. The interior of the hall was filled with murmurs. Groups of uniformed men exchanged whispers and rumors, filling the environment with a palpable unease. The place was packed with warriors enjoying a meal. Conversations flowed freely, revolving around the legends and notable figures of the martial arts world. The young woman calmly explained the situation. She noted that the place was completely occupied by warriors from the Murim alliance, which explained the tension in the air. Nearby, a man narrated the story of a legendary figure. He spoke about Cheongija and the creation of the Shadow Blade, an art that once shook the world. Sima Cheo listened attentively as the narrative continued. The story described how a simple vagabond transformed a nameless style into something formidable. The tone of the conversation turned somber. The legendary martial artist eventually became a public enemy of the Murim, meeting a tragic fate. The name echoed with power. Cheongija. In the collective memory, he remained a solitary and imposing figure under the vast sky. He possessed a power beyond common understanding. It wasn't just about martial arts, but a mysterious ability to read the flow of celestial energy. His perception was terrifying. Through his eyes, the world revealed secrets and energy flows that no ordinary warrior could perceive. From this absolute mastery, he created something unique. Concentrating the energy in his hand, the master forged the technique that would define his legacy. Hearing that name sparked an immediate reaction. An intense emotion shone in his gaze, recognizing the story that was being told. Legend said that Cheongija had passed on his supreme martial art to a single heir, a wandering vagabond. The bearded man listened to those words with gravity, processing the weight of that information about the past. The young woman, however, warned that caution was essential. Even if major conflicts were avoided, danger still lurked. Suddenly, her attention turned to the entrance. A figure emerged from the shadows, altering the atmosphere of the room. The newcomer did not spare criticism, stating with disdain that the subject in question possessed neither manners nor decency. The woman remained silent, absorbing the harsh words as she assessed the delicate situation. The older man watched the exchange of barbs, maintaining a serious and analytical posture in the face of the verbal conflict. One detail, however, did not escape her eyes. The tension increased as she realized the gravity of the moment. Meanwhile, the young martial artist walked through the busy streets, distancing himself from that tense conversation. He stopped in front of a local merchant, briefly interacting with the inhabitants of that vibrant city. The square was full of life. Musicians played and the people applauded, celebrating a piece that seemed distant from the young man's reality. The protagonist observed the joy around him. His eyes, however, remained attentive and distant. His attention turned to a simple scene. A mother and her son at a stall. contrasting with the solitary life he led. The affection between mother and son was evident. The boy thanked her with a genuine smile, illuminating the moment. That scene awakened something in him. The young man looked up, allowing himself a brief moment of silent contemplation under the open sky. In the middle of that underground hell, they made a pact about the future. They swore to achieve everything they had been denied until then, as soon as they escaped. Hyung-woo reinforced the promise, joining the dream of freedom as they protected each other's backs. The red-haired boy smiled, demonstrating an unwavering confidence that they would both get out of there alive. The protagonist, however, remained sober and focused, aware that the slightest distraction could be fatal. Even in the face of danger, his companion's smile served as a reminder of what was at stake. Suddenly, the atmosphere changed. A sharp look signaled that the moment for decisive action had arrived. They advanced against the horde, slashing monsters with ferocity in a desperate fight to see another day dawn. However, the chaos of battle ended up separating them momentarily in the darkness of the cave. The young swordsman kept his guard up, watching carefully, confident in his partner's ability. But then, his expression froze. He realized too late that something was terribly wrong. The unmistakable sound of a fatal blow echoed, followed by the trail of blood that stained the darkness. The protagonist watched, horrified and helpless, as his friend received a mortal wound and collapsed. The battle ceased, leaving only silence and bodies. He knelt beside his fallen companion, ignoring the empty victory. Despair took over him. Tears of pure anguish welled up as he realized there was nothing he could do. As life slipped away, Hyung-woo used his last strength to entrust his friend with a final mission: to survive and deliver a message to his father. The protagonist deeply lamented the lost lives of his companions, silently asking forgiveness from those who were left behind. The night was quiet. Only the moonlight witnessed the weight of his lonely thoughts and the mourning he carried. The young martial artist felt he had an eternal debt. The memory of his dead friends weighed on his conscience. There, under the night sky, he solemnly swore to fulfill the promise made to all who perished in the cave. His steps, once wandering, finally found solid ground. He stopped, brought back to reality by the sound of his own boots. He had walked aimlessly, wandering through the ancient structures while trying to process the turmoil in his mind. However, something nearby interrupted his reverie. His attention suddenly turned to a specific presence. Through a crack, he glimpsed a woman. Her expression denoted surprise and a certain apprehension. The warrior's gaze sharpened immediately. He realized that this place held more than the silence of the night suggested. A large group of disciples was gathered in the courtyard, maintaining a rigid and disciplined formation. The protagonist observed the group's dynamics. A man with an arrogant posture seemed to command the others with absolute authority. In response to an order, the disciples shouted in unison, demonstrating total submission and vigor in training. The young man remained impassive. He only watched that demonstration of hierarchy, analyzing the situation coldly. Meanwhile, the woman he had noticed earlier turned her back and hurried away from that scene. Now positioned on top of a roof, the protagonist contemplated the expanse of the city below, watching everything like a silent shadow. From above, the protagonist watched a quick movement cutting through the city streets. Someone was hurrying out of the urban limits, tearing through the tranquility of the night. Their destination seemed to be the vicinity of Hengshan. The atmosphere was silent, but the air carried a heavy omen under the night sky. In the dark forest, a uniformed detachment marched purposefully. They advanced as a group, maintaining a disciplined formation among the ancient trees. The young swordsman watched the group from his hiding place in the shadows. He realized with suspicion that those warriors were heading exactly to the nefarious place from which he had escaped. His eyes narrowed in absolute concentration. That coincidence was too suspicious, and he needed to understand the intentions of that armed group before acting. Meanwhile, the leaders of the expedition spoke in a serious tone. They recognized that times like that brought constant dangers and discussed the rumors about the target of their pursuit. The older man stroked his beard, calculating. His expression denoted the experience of someone who had already faced many crises and was now carefully planning the next step. Dogo-woon, from the Murim alliance, seemed to reflect with some disdain on the situation. For him, the current competence or threat seemed to have lost its edge. Among the younger disciples, the mood was one of nervousness mixed with momentary relief. A girl sighed, trying to calm the mood as the group stopped briefly. Paeng Cheolyong, vice leader of one of the alliance's corps, took advantage of the pause to approach. He tried to comfort the young companion, demonstrating an interest that went beyond the mission. However, that moment of personal distraction did not last. Everyone's attention was suddenly diverted to an oppressive presence that arose in the darkness ahead. From the shadows of the forest, an imposing figure revealed itself. A muscular and wild-looking man appeared, blocking the path of the entourage with an intimidating aura. The stranger flashed a wide and deeply menacing smile. His eyes gleamed with the anticipation of violence, staring at the Alliance warriors as mere prey. It was the blood-devouring demon, a notorious boss of the Green Forest Bandits. He was not alone. His gang emerged soon after, exuding confidence and danger. The reaction was immediate and tense. One of the Alliance swordsmen readied his weapon, but the cold sweat on his face revealed that the bandits' ambush was a terrible threat. The more experienced warriors stopped abruptly. They felt a change in the atmosphere that signaled an imminent and unknown danger. Fear took over the veteran. He realized, too late, that the threat before them was much greater than they had anticipated. The attack began with a savage fury. The enemies advanced with bloodlust, turning the encounter into a chaotic massacre. Lethal blows were exchanged at high speed. The violence of the battle increased dramatically as bodies were thrown through the air with brutality. Even the leaders of the expedition hesitated in the face of the situation. The overwhelming pressure in the air made the master sweat coldly, paralyzed by the tension. The protagonist watched everything from a distance, hidden in the shadows. His gaze remained cold and analytical in the face of the unfolding conflict. Suddenly, something about that energy seemed familiar to him. The young man recognized the specific nature of the force that was being released there. The name of Cheongicha echoed in his mind. That presence brought back vivid memories of his former and terrible instructor. He recalled a power capable of nullifying any resistance. It was an overwhelming force that swallowed the warrior's will to fight instantly. The young swordsman remembered what he had to endure in the past. He had withstood an ordeal that would break the mind of anyone else. An oppressive miasma began to spread among the ranks. The men around began to fall, overcome without even being touched by a blade. The Alliance warriors lost consciousness, unable to breathe. The toxic energy drained their strength and clouded their senses completely. At the center of that energy storm, the figure remained unwavering. The power emanated from him, subjugating everything and everyone around him. In an instant, the entire group was defeated. They succumbed to an overwhelming feeling of helplessness, unable to react against such pressure. The protagonist, however, remained standing in his memories. He had endured that long and bitter time to finally escape that hell. Memories of an ancient massacre suddenly echoed in the protagonist's mind. He recalled the desperate plea of a fallen comrade, begging that his family know the truth about his cruel fate. The vision of the bodies of his former allies, massacred and lifeless, resurfaced with painful clarity. That was the price paid in blood in the past, a wound that time had not healed. Back in the present in the forest, the young martial artist coldly analyzed the situation. He identified the nature of the force that oppressed everyone. It was not a common pressure, but the energy of the void. The leader of the escort, sweating coldly, realized that he was on the verge of an internal collapse. He understood that he would need to take drastic action to cut off the flow of energy before he suffered a fatal chi deviation. While the others froze, the protagonist advanced calmly. He walked through the oppressive aura as if it did not exist, immune to the effects that brought down the experienced warriors. The young woman watched that scene, astonished and confused. She could not understand how someone of such ordinary appearance could move freely in the face of such overwhelming power. The young man's motivation came from another memory, the moment he received the sword, and a final lesson about kindness. That past sacrifice demanded that he honor the life entrusted to him. With the weight of that legacy on his shoulders, his expression hardened. The compassion that had once been shown to him now impelled him to act in favor of those strangers. He raised his face, exhaling slowly. The decision was made. He would not remain merely a passive spectator in the face of that threat. With his silent intervention, the suffocating pressure dissipated into the air. The members of the escort, still stunned, realized that the hostile energy had inexplicably disappeared. The older warrior looked at the boy with disbelief and shock. He recognized that the group's survival wasn't luck, but the result of that mysterious young man's actions. The protagonist's gaze, however, remained focused and impenetrable. He had acted on principle, not in search of glory or recognition. Without saying a word, he prepared to go on his way. The young man seemed ready to leave the group behind, now that the immediate danger had been neutralized. The girl and the old master watched his back, processing what had just happened. Gratitude mixed with a clear perception of the extraordinary strength he possessed. Not wanting to lose such protection, the young woman proposed a temporary alliance. She suggested they travel together, seeing in his company the only safe chance to continue their journey. The young woman tried to keep the conversation going, asking what exactly the warrior was looking for in that dangerous region. She hoped that by offering help, she could ensure he stayed. She stayed close to the older man, showing protection and loyalty. The swordsman's presence was the only variable that could guarantee the safety of the injured group. The group leader, recovering his composure after the previous attack, stepped forward. Despite the hostile environment, he tried to maintain a dignified posture before the stranger. He observed the young martial artist with a mixture of caution and respect. That boy possessed a strength that could not be ignored. His eyes analyzed the savior deeply, trying to discern whether the young man would be a valuable ally or a new, unpredictable threat. With a solemn gesture, the elder took the floor. He decided to express his gratitude formally, recognizing that they owed their lives to that timely intervention. The protagonist, however, remained still with his sword lowered. He faced the group without emotion, listening to the speech without lowering his guard. The older man continued to speak, offering a friendly smile. He seemed to believe that diplomacy would be enough to win the boy's trust. The surviving guards relaxed, smiling at each other. The relief of having been saved outweighed any initial distrust, and the atmosphere seemed to have become lighter. However, the protagonist's eyes remained icy. The group's camaraderie and thanks had no effect on his mood. The young woman's expression turned to pure shock. The words the swordsman uttered cut through the air, instantly destroying the atmosphere of gratitude. The young man kept his expression apathetic. He wasn't there to make friends or receive praise, and he made that clear with a disconcerting coldness. The entire group recoiled, stunned, and confused. The boy's response was so unexpected and abrupt that they could barely process the rudeness. Ignoring etiquette, the protagonist pointed his finger directly at the elder's face. He made a specific demand, leaving the older man visibly nervous and sweating cold. The insolence of the gesture infuriated the subordinates immediately. Gratitude gave way to indignation at seeing their leader treated with such disrespect. Two hidden observers watched the scene with malicious smiles. They seemed satisfied, awaiting the perfect opportunity to interfere in the events below. One of them rested his hand on the hilt of his sword. The energy contained in the blade vibrated intensely, ready to be released in a lethal attack. The pair maintained vigilance, confident in their advantageous position. They knew that the target group was vulnerable and distracted at that moment. The blue-haired man decided that the wait was almost over. With a cruel smile, he prepared to give the signal to attack against the Alliance leader. Meanwhile, the wind blew strongly around the imposing rock formation. The apparent calm of nature hid the imminent danger. The group leader, however, felt a chill run down his spine. He confessed to his subordinates that the atmosphere was strangely sinister and heavy. The young martial artist remained still in the center of the group. His relaxed posture contrasted with the growing tension that was beginning to affect the other warriors. His keen senses, however, captured what the others ignored. The swordsman immediately realized that the situation had changed. Suddenly, one of the men smiled greedily, asking about the location of a secret manual. The question caught the elder and his allies completely off guard. Simultaneously, agile figures began to climb the steep rocks around them. The siege was closing in rapidly on the cornered group. The protagonist watched the enemy movement with analytical coldness. He didn't seem surprised by the ambush unfolding before his eyes. The stone wall, which seemed safe, became the stage for the invasion. The attackers advanced without hesitation towards the top. Suddenly, a mist of purple and ominous energy began to emanate from the cracks in the rocks. A hidden trap had been activated on the site. The invaders were caught by surprise by the manifestation of that dark power. The shock paralyzed their movements in the middle of the risky climb. Balance was lost instantly. Screams echoed as the men were violently thrown from the slope, unable to resist the force that hit them. The young man landed firmly on the rock, placing himself directly in the path of the invaders. With an impenetrable expression, he announced his presence in that desolate place. The sudden appearance and the audacity of his words left the group leaders momentarily stunned. He claimed that territory, stating categorically that it was where he used to live. The revelation caused astonishment among those present, who did not expect to find someone living in the ruins. However, the tension soon gave way to mockery from some warriors, who found the situation amusing. The group leader, regaining his composure, ignored the warning and began issuing search orders to his officers. The ascending Dragon Corps subordinates saluted promptly, preparing to begin the mission. With disdainful smiles, the elders simply tried to bypass the young man, treating him like an insignificant obstacle. The martial artist watched their arrogance in silence, but his patience had run out. Suddenly, the atmosphere changed drastically. As he let his energy flow, a menacing glint appeared in his eyes, signaling that diplomacy was over. A palpable and dark bloodlust flooded the environment, paralyzing the air around them. The leader shuddered as he felt a firm hand on his shoulder, realizing that the young man had moved in the blink of an eye. Chaos ensued as the subordinates finally reacted to the threat, drawing their weapons in panic. The young martial artist maintained his stance, watching the intruders with a calm indifference. He had already made it clear that this territory belonged to him. The sound of light footsteps broke the momentary silence. indicating that someone had decided to approach him. The young woman seemed genuinely surprised, questioning how someone could live in that isolated and ruined place. With a subtle movement, the protagonist simply nodded, silently confirming his residence there. However, the interaction was abruptly interrupted when her companion stepped in, blocking the way. The man's gaze was sharp and hostile, demonstrating complete distrust of the solitary swordsman. He pulled the woman behind him firmly, assuming a protective and aggressive stance before the stranger. Turning to her with an arrogant smile, the man seemed to treat the situation as a mere inconvenience to be resolved. He suggested that there was a very simple way to verify whether the stranger was truly innocent or a threat. The murderous intent in his eyes made it clear that violence would be the tool used to clarify the truth. Noticing the growing hostility, the protagonist's hand instinctively slid to the hilt of his sword. A dark energy began to emanate from the weapon as he tightened his grip, ready for the imminent combat. The intruder smiled maliciously, underestimating the danger ahead and eager for the confrontation. While the woman watched with clear concern, fearing the outcome, her companion focused only on the approaching fight. The young martial artist did not back down. Enveloped in his own menacing aura, he awaited the enemy's first move. The young men realized the group's strategy below. They weren't planning an honorable duel, but a coordinated attack to subdue him with numerical advantage. If that's how they wanted to play, he wouldn't back down. The martial artist accepted the disadvantage, his expression hardening as he decided how to respond to the threat. The rival swordsman grinned arrogantly, anticipating the pleasure of violence. To him, victory seemed guaranteed even before the first blow. Beside him, the young woman showed distress, realizing that the situation had escalated to a point of no return, driven by her companion's aggression. The aggressor's feet planted firmly on the rocky ground, tensing their muscles for the imminent burst of movement. The protagonist's focus sharpened, his vision narrowed, blocking distractions to read the murderous intent directed at him. Time seemed to dilate. He tracked the invisible trajectory of the attacks that were about to be unleashed against his position. The offensive began. While one opponent advanced to create frontal pressure, another tried to flank him, executing a classic pincer maneuver. Ignoring the difficult terrain, the attackers scaled the rocks quickly, closing the siege against the lone young man at the top. A staff came down with force, aiming to crush him. The protagonist, however, moved fluidly, dodging under the enemy's guard. The response was immediate. With an explosive movement, he released his energy, intercepting the attack and destabilizing the opponent in the air. The gang leader watched the exchange of blows with a subtle nod, pleased to see his subordinates testing the target's strength. The fight became chaotic on the steep slope. The young man maneuvered between the multiple aggressors, using the environment to his advantage to avoid being surrounded. The force of the impact repelled the attackers. Unable to maintain their balance on the loose stones, they were thrown back by the boy's impenetrable defense. The protagonist remained unwavering. He coldly observed the persistence of his enemies, awaiting their next suicidal move with total control of the situation. The young martial artist tightened his grip on his sword hilt. The energy around him began to vibrate intensely, signaling that his restraint was over. His eyes gleamed with an unearthly purple light. There was no longer just defense in his gaze, but a focused and overwhelming murderous intent. The leader of the enemy group screamed, overcome with panic. He realized, too late, that the strength of the opponent before him was on a completely unattainable level. The other warriors stalled, paralyzed by sudden fear. The pressure emanating from the lone swordsman was enough to break the gang's formation and confidence. The group remained still before the cave entrance. The heavy atmosphere and dust from the previous combat served as a reminder of the deadly danger they faced. Cold sweat ran down the elder's face as he looked up. He was trying to comprehend the magnitude of the power they had foolishly provoked. His subordinates also looked up, their expressions changing from aggression to disbelief. The group's initial arrogance had completely disappeared. The leader tried to regain his composure to warn his men. However, the shock of witnessing such skill left him momentarily disoriented. All eyes turned to the top of the rocky mountain. The impressiveness of the scenery seemed small compared to the overwhelming presence that the young man emanated. Amidst the tension, the young woman turned to her dark-robed companion. Worried, she questioned whether he was hurt or shaken by the confrontation. The boy simply nodded silently, confirming that he was fine. Despite the calm response, his attention remained fixed on the unfolding events. The girl, however, couldn't hide her anxiety. The fear for everyone's safety there was clearly etched on her pale face. Suddenly, her expression changed from fear to surprise. Something about the swordsman's figure or his aura sparked a sudden memory or recognition in her. The young noble beside her narrowed his eyes, finally connecting the dots. In a tone of disbelief, he uttered a name he thought belonged to the past. The mention of the name Dan Hyungwoo echoed with weight in the air. The revelation of that identity transformed the confusion of the moment into an even greater mystery. The young man held the woman for a brief moment, ensuring her safety. There was a silent tension between them, a mutual acknowledgement before paths needed to diverge. Without looking back, the swordsman resumed his solitary journey. She remained there, watching his figure walk away, aware that this brief encounter had come to an end. Thus, the tumultuous search for the legendary legacy was ended. The Murim Alliance's expedition to find Cheongicha's secret weapon ended, at least for now. The news, however, traveled quickly to the Alliance headquarters. The city seemed calm under the sunlight, but the consequences of the events on the mountain were already beginning to arrive. Murmurs spread among the warriors in the streets. Disbelief and curiosity took over the conversations as they tried to separate the facts from the exaggerated rumors. In the inner corridors, gossip gave way to serious discussions. The sect members debated the fragmented and worrying information returning from the expedition site. The tension, however, was much greater in the upper echelons. At the top of the great central tower, where the real decisions were made, the atmosphere was heavy. The frustration manifested physically. A fist clenched tightly on the table, trembling with contained rage at the reported failure. The leader couldn't contain his fury. He demanded immediate explanations about the secret weapon, refusing to accept that the main objective had escaped his grasp. The Alliance Council of Elders was gathered in extraordinary session. Seated in a circle, they discussed the seriousness of the rumors and the impact this would have on the organization's reputation. One of the masters maintained a stern and calculating expression. He knew they needed more than outrage. They needed to understand the truth behind the report. It was then that a material piece of evidence was presented. An ancient box was placed on the red table, interrupting the discussions and attracting all eyes. The minds of those present turned to the darkness of the cave where the search took place. They imagined the moment of discovery, where the expedition leaders had come across that object. The item rested on a document filled with notes. The small wooden box, seemingly simple, carried the weight of the entire mission's effort. The elder took the report in his hands to examine it carefully. Upon reading the content, his expression hardened, realizing that the mystery was deeper than they imagined. The patriarch observed the scene with a penetrating gaze, assessing the gravity of the situation unfolding before him. The handwriting on the paper was imposing, describing a demonic entity destined to shake the structures of that era. Times ago, isolated in the darkness of the cave, the young martial artist had written those same words with solitary determination. Upon finishing the message, he placed a small wooden box on the paper, sealing a mysterious legacy there. A smile of pure malice and satisfaction crossed the boy's face, aware of the chaos that object would cause in the future. Back in the present, anxious hands unlocked the box's latch, releasing a mystical smoke that escaped through the cracks. The lid was lifted, revealing a translucent sphere that shone intensely, promising an incalculable power. However, upon examining the inside of the supposed elixir, the leader glimpsed the reflection of a parasitic creature, realizing the hidden trap. The subordinate, sweating coldly, tried to explain the item's origin, visibly nervous about the disturbing discovery. The superior listened to the account with skepticism, his expression hardening as the nature of the object became clear. An advisor intervened in the conversation, gesturing as he analyzed the implications of that discovery for the sect. The discussion evoked memories of past battles, questioning whether this could be Cheongicha's legendary secret weapon. The leader's gaze narrowed even further. A dangerous understanding began to form in his astute mind. Meanwhile, in the bustling city streets, rumors about someone descending the mountain were already spreading among the warriors. The news spread quickly, and it soon became evident that the entire attention of the martial arts world would turn to the Murim Alliance. The subordinates recoiled, visibly shaken by the news they had just received. Cold sweat betrayed their nervousness in the face of the unexpected situation. The sect leader maintained his composure, listening to the report with a stern and calculating expression. One of the advisors tried to justify what had happened, stammering as he searched for the right words to appease his master. However, the patriarch's attention was focused entirely on the small wooden box on the table. Upon observing the object more closely, a dark suspicion crossed his gaze. He realized that this was no ordinary treasure. Inside the translucent sphere, a repulsive parasitic creature moved, revealing the true and dangerous nature of the supposed elixir. Meanwhile, far away, the setting sun bathed the gates of the Zhou clan's property, marking the end of another day. A loyal servant came to meet the newcomer, expressing relief at seeing him return safely from his journey. The young martial artist, however, had other concerns on his mind. He ignored the formalities and immediately asked for the young miss. The old servant maintained his posture, preparing to answer this direct question. With a calm smile, he confirmed her presence, demonstrating the usual hospitality of the house. Suddenly, the young man noticed something. His attention was diverted to a figure approaching silently. The young miss was there, but her expression carried a deep and worried sadness. Unlike usual, the warrior's keen eye immediately noticed a peculiar detail in her behavior. She held the sword against her body with excessive force, demonstrating a strange and protective obsession with the weapon's sheath. Her hand trembled violently on the sword's sheath. It wasn't just nervousness. There was a physical force struggling to be contained, making the weapon vibrate against the will of the one holding it. The young martial artist watched the young miss carefully. He perceived the anguish in her posture, noticing that she was about to make a desperate plea. With teary eyes and labored breathing, the girl seemed to be begging for help. The vulnerability on her face made it clear that she had reached her emotional limit. The swordsman narrowed his eyes, analyzing the situation. Something in her helpless expression awakened a familiar and painful feeling within him. Suddenly, the memory of Hyungwoo flooded his mind. He recalled the final moment of his fallen comrade, seeing the same helplessness on his friend's face that he now saw on the girl's. The protagonist felt the weight of that tragic past. The similarity between the situations disturbed him, reminding him of the consequences of not being strong enough to protect someone. His expression hardened with determination. He decided, at that instant, that he would not allow history to repeat itself before his eyes. The young miss noticed the change in his aura. She stood still, surprised by the sudden intensity emanating from the warrior in front of her. However, the moment was abruptly interrupted. A loud voice echoed through the courtyard of the property, breaking the silent connection that had formed between them. The young man turned quickly towards the source of the noise. The girl also looked away, seeming to recoil from the sudden intrusion into their conversation. The hope on her face disappeared, giving way to resignation. The opportunity to explain what was really happening had been lost with the arrival of others. The escort leader approached, oblivious to the previous tension. The protagonist remained alert, observing the movement around him as the older man spoke. Servants passed by carrying heavy wooden boxes. The swordsman followed their path with his eyes, noticing something strange in the routine of the place. The older man laughed loudly, trying to maintain an atmosphere of normality and camaraderie. He seemed to want to distract the guest or minimize the seriousness of the environment. However, the protagonist's focus was on the worker. The servant's extreme physical exertion, with tense muscles and excessive sweat, suggested that the load was much heavier or more dangerous than it appeared. A rough-looking man smiled arrogantly, sweat dripping down his face. He exuded the typical confidence of someone accustomed to intimidating others without consequences. The young martial artist watched the scene impassively, while the escort leader seemed tense. The old warrior recognized the danger of the situation and the instability of the moment. The swordsman turned his gaze to the elder next to him. There was a silent communication between them, with the leader showing clear concern about how things were unfolding. The escort leader tried to intervene, gesturing nervously to calm things down. However, the protagonist kept his attention fixed on the aggressor, analyzing him coldly. The thug's smile widened maliciously. He seemed to feel a sadistic pleasure in the tension he was creating, certain that he was in control. The protagonist stared at the man up close, showing no fear. Around them, murmurs indicated that this aggressive behavior was a recurring and well-known thing to everyone there. In contrast to the provocation, the young swordsman maintained an expression of total indifference. His cold eyes reflected no intimidation, only a calculated disinterest. The young man's lack of reaction made the bandit's mask fall. His expression twisted in fury and disbelief as he realized that his attempt to intimidate had failed. The martial artist simply walked past the man, ignoring his existence. The aggressor, caught off guard by such disdain, stammered, unable to process the immediate affront. Furious at being ignored in front of everyone, the man shouted at the young man's back. His voice echoed through the courtyard, demanding a response and escalating the conflict. Rage consumed him completely. He bellowed with all the strength in his lungs, trying to impose his authority through volume and uncontrolled aggression. The young man stopped suddenly. Something in the aggressor's tone finally caught his attention, causing him to turn his face with a serious and penetrating expression. He turned completely, emanating an aura of crushing pressure. The swordsman's gaze was sharp and dangerous, revealing the true depth of his hidden power. The thug froze instantly, cold sweat betraying his terror. Faced with that overwhelming presence, he realized the fatal mistake he had made in provoking such an opponent. Fear made him change his attitude instantly. Trying to disguise his panic and save his own skin, the man awkwardly suggested that everyone go to sleep, ending the confrontation hastily. The young martial artist's gaze remained cold and penetrating. He didn't need words to impose his presence, just a silent stare. The pressure he emanated was as sharp as a blade. The man who had provoked him earlier froze, feeling the crushing weight of that murderous aura pierce his courage. As the protagonist passed him without even turning his face, the escort warrior trembled. humiliated by the abysmal difference in power he had just witnessed. For the young swordsman, that was irrelevant. He maintained his indifferent expression, treating the incident and the provocation as nothing more than a minor setback. However, Jungchil's shame only increased. His companions began to whisper and laugh, mocking how he, who always acted arrogantly, had retreated so easily. Jungchil heard the taunts clearly. The public humiliation wounded his pride, transforming his initial fear into a seething rage against the newcomer who had caused it all. The protagonist ignored the tension around him. He walked among the men with a calmness that contrasted with the hostile atmosphere and the curious looks he received. Following the instructions received, the group headed to the shared dormitory. The young martial artist followed the flow, oblivious to the venomous gaze fixed on his back. Jungchil watched the young man's relaxed posture as he walked away. Envy and resentment mixed, creating a malicious intent in his disturbed mind. He gritted his teeth, unable to accept the moral defeat. At that moment, he decided that the affront would not go unpunished, and that he would find a way to retaliate. Later, under the cloak of night, the dormitory fell silent. While everyone slept, Jungchil rose stealthily, fixing his gaze on the sleeping figure of the protagonist. He moved with predatory caution, crawling across the wooden floor. His intention was clear: to catch the young warrior off guard while he seemed vulnerable. Cold sweat ran down his face as he checked if anyone else had woken up. The tension of the moment was suffocating, but the desire for revenge outweighed the risk. Suddenly, a violent impact stopped him. Jungchil's face contorted in shock and pain as he collided against an invisible force even before touching his target. He was paralyzed, his face pressed against a barrier of energy. Even asleep, the young martial artist possessed an automatic defense that rejected any nearby malice. The aggressor lay on the floor, trembling under the imposing shadow of the young martial artist. The difference in power between them became painfully clear at that moment. Terror took over the man. He retreated clumsily, desperate to put distance between himself and the monster he had foolishly tried to ambush. However, the protagonist remained strangely calm. He seemed barely awake, his expression unchanged by the violence that had just occurred. The bandit's face twisted in absolute horror. Cold sweat dripped down his skin as he realized the magnitude of his fatal mistake. His hands trembled uncontrollably as he tried to react, but his body refused to obey in the face of that overwhelming presence. Then, the young master's eyes opened. A sharp and penetrating gleam appeared, dispelling any illusion of sleepiness. In that look, the attacker saw his own pathetic reflection. He was being observed not as a threat, but as a mere inconvenience. The pure pressure of that gaze was enough to take his breath away. He recoiled sharply, as if he had been physically struck. Unable to withstand the intensity, the man collapsed completely to the floor, his legs giving way in a heap of humiliating defeat. The protagonist offered a slight, almost mocking smile. The fear he inspired seemed to provide him with a moment of dark amusement. His expression soon settled into a cold indifference. He had faced true demons. A cowardly human did not deserve his serious attention. His mind wandered back to the darkness of the cave. In that hellish isolation, survival had required much sharper instincts. He recalled the days of deprivation, living like a beast alongside his companions. Those trials had forged his current strength. Compared to the demonic aura he had mastered in the depths of the mountain, the murderous intent of a common bandit was laughable. As the tension dissipated, the sun began to rise over the inn. A new day was dawning, illuminating the end of the silent confrontation. The young martial artist decided it was time to wake the one who dared disturb him, breaking the silence of the morning. The man who attempted the sneak attack opened his eyes, immediately met with the imposing figure of his target watching him standing. The recognition was instantaneous, and the terror of the previous night returned in full force, stamping panic on his sweaty face. Driven by pure survival instinct, the aggressor frantically crawled away, fleeing from the presence of the one he now knew to be untouchable. Later, already safe among the other travelers, the man tried to dress and regain his composure, although the fear still lingered. Outside the inn, the morning advanced quietly over the courtyard full of goods that needed to be organized. The heavy work began, but in an unexpected way. Huge crates were thrown into the air with impressive lightness. The young martial artist moved nimbly through the air, manipulating the heavy load as if it weighed nothing, defying gravity. His movements were blurs of speed, executing the transport of goods with superhuman efficiency. Each landing was precise and controlled, demonstrating a bodily mastery that went far beyond that of a simple porter. In a matter of seconds, he had erected a perfectly aligned tower of crates, positioning himself on top of the unstable structure with total balance. His expression remained serene and indifferent, as if that extraordinary athletic feat cost him no effort at all. On the ground, the other workers and escort guards watched the scene in amazement, unable to comprehend such strength and skill. silence took over the courtyard as the group stared at the young man above, realizing the abysmal difference in power between them. Without wasting time on the admiration of others, he continued the work, making more boxes fly through the air to complete the task. The escort guards chatted casually, awaiting the moment of departure. The tension of the previous confrontation had dissipated, giving way to the routine of preparation. The young noblewoman took advantage of the calm moment to approach. She displayed a gentle smile, seeking to end the meeting in a proper and polite manner. The protagonist maintained his serious posture, watching her carefully. He waited silently to hear what she had to say, without showing impatience. She seemed to hesitate for a moment, her eyes shining with a mixture of expectation and nervousness before the warrior's stoic figure. The young swordsman remained still before her. His imposing and silent presence contrasted with the delicacy of the situation. Trying to disguise her embarrassment, the girl smiled a little awkwardly. There was something important she needed to express before he left. They exchanged final words in a gentler tone. The rigid formality between the warrior and the noblewoman began to dissolve at that moment. With sincerity in her eyes, she lowered her guard. The gratitude she felt went beyond a simple payment for services rendered or protection. The martial artist processed her words. For the first time in a long time, someone looked at him without fear or purely commercial interest. He did not look away. There was a silent understanding in his features, recognizing the human value of her gesture. She finally verbalized her desire with a hopeful smile, asking to be considered not only as a protected person, but as a friend. The moment of farewell arrived. The protagonist mounted his horse, leaving the young woman and her personal guard behind in the courtyard of the residence. Bang Cheolyong, leading the group, waved cheerfully in farewell. The brief alliance came to an end, leaving a positive impression on everyone. The young woman watched the departure with a stunned and slightly melancholic expression. The figure of that solitary warrior left a lasting mark on her mind. Life on the road continued relentlessly. The protagonist continued his journey alongside his companions, already focused on the next mission assigned by the Murim alliance. Contrary to the desire for peace that his late friend cherished, the outside world proved turbulent. The young martial artist and the lady prepared for the journey, unaware of the dark machinations that were taking place far away. Meanwhile, under a dark and oppressive night sky, a sinister fortress hid bloody secrets. The heavy atmosphere around the structure suggested that violence was the only law in force in that place. The interior of the hall revealed a scene of total massacre. The leader of the organization watched, stunned, the bodies of 30 members of his elite, the Celestial Vigil Corps, who had been completely decimated. He crouched next to one of the corpses, trying to process the impossibility of that scene. Anger and confusion mixed on his face as he assessed the extent of the loss of his subordinates. Those warriors possessed enough strength to sweep entire squads of the Murim alliance without any difficulty. However, the reality before his eyes showed that they were eliminated as if they were nothing. A pale hand emerged from the dark curtains, bringing with it a murderous aura. The presence that was revealed seemed to be the living answer to that bloody enigma. Memories of the attack echoed in the environment like a nightmare. Experienced warriors had been thrown into the air, unable to offer any resistance against the overwhelming force that hit them. There was no real battle, just a one-sided slaughter. Bodies fell lifeless, even before they understood what had hit them, staining the floor of the noble hall. The most terrifying detail, however, was the numerical realization. That entire elite squad had not been defeated by a rival army, but by the brute force of a single person. The voice in the shadows questioned the nature of that force, hinting at a profane origin. That devastating power seemed to be the result of experiments to create hundreds of similar monsters. A manic, twisted smile formed on the bearded man's face. Far from showing remorse, he seemed to revel in the carnage and the success of his monstrous creation. The insanity of that moment seemed to vibrate through the very structure of the fortress. The wind howled outside, as if nature rejected the evil that inhabited that place. Amidst the chaos, the villain's mind turned to a specific obsession. His thoughts fixated on Lady Seolyon's beauty, indicating that she would be the next target of his sick desire. Rage soon replaced the sadistic pleasure. The man vowed to find the one responsible for destroying his precious squad, determined to hunt down the bastard who dared defy his power. Far from that darkness under the blue sky, the young lady watched her new protector with curiosity. She reflected on the irony of a simple porter carrying a sword, judging it imprudent to bear a burden he might not be able to handle. A new group intercepted the traveler's path. At the front, mounted on horseback and displaying an arrogant smile, was Bang Cheolyong, identified as the vice leader of the troop. A sharp and attentive gaze immediately picked up on the change in the atmosphere. The protagonist observed the arrival of the strangers with his usual calm, silently assessing the level of threat they posed. Peng Qiuliang wasted no time and addressed the group with a mocking tone, gesturing disrespectfully as he spoke. The young woman immediately recognized who they were, representatives of the Murim alliance. The fear of causing any offense to such a powerful organization paralyzed her with terror. Ignoring any decorum, the vice leader invaded the girl's personal space, intimidating her with his aggressive presence and provocative words. Just behind, Peng Miryong watched the interaction with a tense expression, noticing the discomfort her companion was causing. Before the situation worsened, a firm arm reached out. The young martial artist physically placed himself between the aggressor and the girl, blocking the advance. The girl looked in surprise at her protector's back, as he maintained a cold and defiant gaze towards the threat ahead. Realizing the imminent danger, Hyung Pyo, a warrior from the escort, hurried to intervene with a formal greeting, trying to de-escalate the conflict. The tension in the air was suffocating. The young woman knew that any misstep against those noble warriors could result in disaster for the entourage. Peng Qiuliang, however, found the interference amusing. He looked at the protectors with pure disdain, not taking their posture seriously. The protagonist was not shaken by the mockery. He remained still as a barrier between the abusive authority and the woman he had promised to protect. Hyung Pyo, on the other hand, was sweating bullets. He was desperately trying to appease the noble warrior, aware of the dangerous social hierarchy that separated them. Taking advantage of his superior position, the vice leader mocked the escort's anxiety, using the fear of unemployment as a weapon to humiliate him even further. The young woman smiled with an air of amusement. She considered the escort leader's attitude surprisingly childish for someone in his position. Her gaze turned to the outer courtyard. The young martial artist was there, standing silently, awaiting the unfolding of events. She approached with the intention of speaking, but hesitated. Something in his relaxed posture seemed to contradict the tension of the moment. Upon noticing the smug smile on the young man's face, the girl reconsidered her judgment. She began to doubt if he was really someone special. The glimmer of interest in her eyes diminished. Disappointment filled her thoughts in the face of that apparent lack of seriousness. The protagonist, however, remained with his back turned. He didn't seem to care about the change in her opinion of him. The young woman watched him with a disheartened look. The aura of mystery and power that surrounded him before seemed to have completely dissipated. As the group moved through the courtyard, the escort leader and his subordinates remained alert, watching the stranger walk among them. Inside the residence, the elder in charge gave precise instructions. The situation demanded absolute caution to ensure everyone's safety. The old master's face was marked by seriousness. He knew there was no room for error in those circumstances. The escort leader listened attentively, but the cold sweat on his face betrayed his nervousness in the face of the responsibility he carried. The elder himself could not hide his tension. There was a visible fear in his eyes, despite the smile he was trying to maintain. Outside, the escort leader turned his attention to the protagonist. Something in the young man's figure suddenly caught his eye. He noticed a disturbing detail on the young man's waist. The sheathed sword emanated a dark energy, visible as black smoke. Upon realizing the true nature of that weapon, the leader's expression changed. A smile of recognition and relief appeared on his face. The young martial artist maintained his composure, ignoring the tension in the air. His attention was focused, but he showed no concern. Behind him, the escort leader decided to act. With a smile of someone who holds experience, he reached for his sword, preparing a test. The veteran assumed his combat stance with fluidity. He displayed his blade not to kill, but to challenge and measure the boy's worth. The protagonist only cast a sideways glance, cold and analytical. The provocation did not seem to have the desired effect. With an inviting gesture, the older man called the young man to fight. He was confident in his technique and expected an immediate response. However, the young man remained still, holding his sheathed weapon. His refusal to assume a fighting stance was, in itself, a silent response. The leader's confidence began to crumble. He perceived something unsettling in his opponent's relaxed posture, and cold sweat broke out. The young martial artist's gaze sharpened. He had already dissected the flaws in the man's defense before him. Without any hesitation, he prepared his move. The stance was casual, but it carried a latent threat. Then, he acted. With a simple hand movement, too fast to follow, he intercepted the opponent's space. The escort leader was paralyzed, caught completely off guard. The speed of that reaction defied his understanding. The smile vanished from his face, replaced by pure shock. He realized the chasm of skill that separated them. The veteran lost his balance, forced to retreat before the invisible pressure of that single gesture. The young man remained impassive. He collapsed to the ground, looking up with wide eyes. The reality of the situation hit him with full force. Fear and respect mingled in his expression. He understood that this young man was on a level he would never reach. The young martial artist recognized the difference in level between them. There was no arrogance in his gaze, only the cold realization of the reality about their abilities. The escort leader, far from feeling humiliated by the quick defeat, smiled. He seemed genuinely impressed with the skill he had just witnessed. Showing respect, the veteran extended an open hand. This gesture signaled the end of hostility and the beginning of mutual recognition between warriors. The tension in the protagonist's shoulders dissipated. He realized that the intentions of the man before him were honorable and accepted the change in atmosphere. The leader tried to explain himself, visibly embarrassed. He admitted that his previous judgment had been hasty and sought to repair the mistake made. The young man remained silent, listening attentively, as the dynamic between the two definitively changed from adversaries to allies. With sudden and noisy enthusiasm, the man insisted that the swordsman accept his immediate hospitality as a form of apology. The abrupt change in attitude and the volume of his voice caught the protagonist by surprise, but he found no malice in those excited words. The handshake sealed the agreement. A silent alliance was formed between the lone traveler and the leader of the escort group. Night fell on the residence. Fate willed that the young man end up accepting the invitation to spend the night at Hyungpyo's base of operations. Inside the quarters, the atmosphere was calm. The escort leader seemed relaxed, already treating his new guest with familiarity. They took the time to study the route. The veteran pointed out details on the map, sharing vital information and planning the next steps of the journey. The next morning, as the protagonist prepared in the courtyard, his revealed physique caused immediate astonishment in the men around him. Hyungpyo couldn't contain his admiration, pointing and commenting loudly on the young man's well-developed musculature, the result of rigorous training. However, they were not alone. Hidden behind a column, the young ward observed the scene with an intense and calculating gaze. The man reacted with shock at the mention of the clan leader. The order received seemed to defy his immediate understanding of the situation. However, he swallowed his doubts. The reality of the hierarchy imposed itself, and he accepted the command in resigned silence. The young woman, in turn, did not hesitate. With a firm voice, she confirmed that the will of the alliance leader would be strictly followed. While the men carried the supplies in the background, she remained isolated. Her gaze revealed the weight of the responsibility she carried as she waited. From the upper floor, the protagonist observed the scene. His attention was fixed on the solitary figure of the girl standing in the courtyard. Upon realizing that she was being watched, she raised her face. There was a moment of surprise and slight embarrassment upon meeting his eyes. But she soon regained her composure. A soft smile appeared on her lips, trying to convey tranquility to the warrior who was watching her. The young man, impassive, looked away. He crossed his arms, returning to close himself off in his own thoughts about the mission. The horses were brought and saddled. The calmness of the morning gave way to the practical bustle of the imminent departure. The escort leader already displayed a lighter countenance. He exchanged words of encouragement with the young man beside him, raising the group's morale. Mayuk, the escort warrior, approached his mount. With a confident smile, he prepared to assume his position in the vanguard. Already mounted, he adjusted his posture and checked his balance. The group was finally organized to leave the place. The heavy carriages began to roll. The sound of creaking wood echoed through the courtyard as the massive load moved slowly. The foot guards assumed their formations around the vehicles. Their faces showed total focus on protecting the valuable transport. The commotion attracted the attention of the locals. The people gathered, watching and murmuring with curiosity about the departure of that unusual group. As the guards organized themselves for departure, the young man observed the group's movements and hierarchy. The scene brought back the memory of Dan Hyungwoo. It was on a mission just like this that his friend's true journey began.